Hello, Endersword here again, this time with a video related to the USS Vengeance and the recent massive debuffing of the cube against it. I'm going to keep this relatively short, as I know it may only really be interesting to people in their 70s or approaching that, but it does kind of show as well how some changes in meta between one particular type of fight actually trickles down and impacts the rest. So that can kind of apply more in general throughout the game as well, how a change in one area can sort of have butterfly effects to other parts of the game. So the three things that are essentially at play here are going to be the USS Vengeance, the Borg Cube, and then the Crenshaw kind of sneaking back in to competition as well. So the first thing to focus on is the cube versus the Vengeance. In the current state, basically a cube is always going to run some variation of this crew. You're going to have Freeman as captain. The intention here is to get the 100% extra shots in the first round. So the cube already fires all its weapons in round one, whereas the Vengeance fires only two of them and then fires everything in round two. The intention of a cube, whether it's against a Vengeance or an Epic 70 ship or really any type of ship, is just to win in round one and completely destroy the ship before they even have a chance to fire back, ideally, but at least before they get into later rounds and their officers have a chance to accumulate. So Freeman is definitely helpful in that she's going to double the shots right out of the gate. Nothing gives you more bonus shots than that in round one. Other officers surpass it later on, but as long as you're planning on only a one-round fight, then that's the way to go. Honor Guard Worf, obviously increasing the critical chance, plus 100% crit chance, is going to make it so that you crit all or almost all of the time, especially when you add on other researches. Fleet Commander Khan is the thing that really made this viable. Adding 50% chance there on top of the 100%, even when people then have negative crit chance research or negative crit chance officers on board, this is going to overwhelm that. So you're basically at 100 or near 100% chance in round one anyway. So not only you're firing a bunch of weapons, doubling the output of those weapons, but then you're critting on top of that. Then we get Specialist 7, who is better in tier 4 and 5, or Lorca to trigger hull breach. The intention here is twofold. One, to increase the power of the crits you're doing by 1.5, basically amplifying those, so you're doing a lot more damage, but also she is then going to cause a trigger of the Freeman officer ability, which is going to give you extra isolytic cascade on top of everything. And thirdly, by having hull breach, you're going to cancel out Icheb and Tuvok on the enemy ship so that they don't trigger. So if you're the first to initiate the combat, you're going to make it so that Icheb and Tuvok do not trigger on their end of things, whereas if you use something else here like morale or burning, that's not going to work. It's not going to prevent them from going off. So that is the key here, and your goal is to basically kill the enemy ship immediately. On the Vengeance side of things, because of that delayed firing, that 2 weapons fire up front and then 4 in the next round, the Interceptor Strike Team is still very strong as long as you can survive that first round of combat. Now, Garrick triggering twice is going to put you in plus 120% crit chance, and then Ducat, after firing a number of weapons, is going to slowly not that slowly, but start to surpass Freeman. So by your third or fourth shot, he's now providing extra shots higher than the amount Freeman does. And then Andy Billups obviously there for isolytic damage. The problem here is always trying to survive that first round to get to the point that you're firing off enough weapons to then counter the cube side of things. The alternative here is essentially attempting crit suppression. So again, we're trying to prolong our own life. Freeman is going to give us the isolytic out of the gate, the extra shots out of the gate, but will not give the isolytic in this case because we're not triggering a status effect. This unfortunately then allows Icheb and Tuvok to work, but we're now trying to bank on getting off enough shots with our own crit damage while trying to survive by suppressing some of their crits, and then hopefully kill them by round 2. is essentially the plan here. So that's essentially where we were. A maxed out Vengeance that is kind of crewed properly, proper below decks, things like that, was definitely beating a maxed out Cube. So that was kind of already the case. But where the complaints were coming from were from people that were expecting a much lower tier Vengeance to be able to beat the Max Cube. It's very, very expensive, apparently, to max out the Vengeance, like tens of thousands of dollars on top of acquiring the thing for anywhere from between like $10,000 and $50,000. So it's kind of out of the realm for most of us in the game to even consider such a thing. But largely because they spent so much money on it, it was debatably advertised as a PvP ship, even though it's clearly not. If you looked at the design, it was very clear it was not a PvP ship intended. But once it was maxed out, it does pretty well. But there were definitely complaints there that, you know, a non-maxed out one, the power number is way higher. Why am I not automatically winning? So there was a lot of crying about this. And that's why they chose to nerf the Cube. So looking specifically at what the nerfs are, it's essentially just a fuck you Worf sort of thing. So there is a reduction in the opponent's critical hit chance by 100% at the beginning of each round while using the USS Vengeance. So if you did have anything that was able to increase the crit chance over time, like a con or something like that, that's irrelevant, and it completely cancels out Honor Guard Worf. So basically with him in the negative 100, if you put them on, you might get like a few crits still in round one, like maybe 10% or something like that. Those will be totally gone by round two, as it will reapply the 100% as well. So you're just going to be completely zero. So it basically makes it so that you're not going to have any value in crewing Worf anymore. So he's just going to have to chill in his mud bath. And on top of that, they increased the USS Vengeance's isolytic damage versus the Borg Cube. They didn't say in the patch notes, but it is plus 300%. For most people fighting, that's effectively going to be in the ballpark of 1,000% reality. So it's going to be that 300% of base multiplied by the isolytic cascade that you have, which is probably going to be 3 point something. So it's going to multiply that by about 3 or 4, depending on the officer setup that you're using and levels of things, etc. I kind of assume anyone using a Vengeance, all their officers are maxed and stuff. I just assume everything they have is going to be pretty much maxed out. So the effect of this, or the intended apparent effect of this, is that the Borg Cube is now completely nerfed against the ship specifically. So you can no longer run this Honor Guard Worf single round kill based on crits sort of thing. So what sort of thing can they do to counter this? And there's a few options. We got to see how this kind of plays out. We haven't experimented a lot with this sort of thing. I think we're going to see part of the reason I wanted to do this is ahead of arenas tomorrow. So give people a chance to try different things. One obvious thing is just going back to the battleship strike team. So just going to Lon, Una, and Shax, going back to the normal thing. I think the issue with that is, again, it's going to be a lot slower. So you're ignoring a little bit of shields up front. The FT has had some conflict with Una, so whether that works that well or not remains to be seen. But the idea here is to bypass, a good portion of the shields, go into the normal thing, accept a slightly longer fight, and just win on more shots as land ramps up. But if you're facing the interceptor strike team, it kind of ramps up a lot quicker. It's going to hit that 100% critical rate a lot faster, and it's going to be outputting a lot more damage, so that once it hits the round 2 and round 4 are the really big ones, you're probably never getting to a round 4 where you're still alive. The whole point was the Vengeance was trying to survive round 1, so once it gets past that, it's usually good. So this may still be a decent one that you're not winning, but you're still doing some amount of damage to it. Then there's a few variations to this where you try and essentially hold your own and stop them from critting, since you can no longer crit anymore, then we're going to do a variation of the strike team where we're going to incorporate flocks into it, where hopefully they're not going to be critting. Eventually, it's going to take, Garrick basically 2 rounds to overcome this, and then by round 3 and 4, you're firing at 100% crit on the Vengeance side, but it at least will get you through the first 2 rounds of this where they're not critting 100% of the time. The problem is the trade-off is you're giving up extra Isolytic Cascade, and you're also giving up the synergy on Lon's extra shots, which is really the big key to her. She's the fastest ramping extra shots officer available, and that's kind of what you want to get to. So it's a trade-off there to control their damage and get through. Another option is, instead of Phlox, going for Harrison, where you're now trying to go for a full shield bypass. The combination of Harrison and Una will completely disregard the shields of the opponent, and then you're just hoping that everything that gets through hits the hull, and you're now doing enough shots basically in first round that you're maybe still trying to push for either that first round kill or enough damage output that at least you're severely damaging the hull, and then when you take a second shot at it, you're able to kill him off. Another option, to stick with Freeman as your base and go with Specialist 7 so that you're still triggering the extra shots on Freeman and the isolytic damage on Freeman, and then again doing the variation of either then trying to suppress their crits instead of get your own, or bypass their shields. And there's some interchangeability between shield bypass and critting. So effectively, if you had an officer that was capable of just ignoring 100% of the shields from round 1, so right away you don't have to hit their shield at all, that is equivalent to a 500% crit. So ignoring their shield is essentially equivalent to multiplying your damage by 5, because instead of 80% of it approximately being absorbed by their shield, it is going to go directly into your hull. So if you can ignore 100% of their shield, then that goes to their hull. It's effectively the same thing as if you had a 500% damage crit and they had full shields, they had normal shields. Now, in reality, again, the way that the Forbidden Tech works, you're already getting some shield discount off of it, so you're not going to get that full 500% over normal, but the combination of the two, you can basically get rid of it. So that may be a way to go, that if you're just looking to get the most possible damage on, even knowing that you may then die immediately after, you're at least getting damage directly to the hull. And very often when you're trying to kind of punch up, your intent is to get damage to the hull so that you can at least kill them next time, or you and your team can whittle someone down, as opposed to just dying without effectively doing any damage, as you see in a lot of fights. Now, the trickle-on impact to this is going to be how it then affects the fights with other epic ships. So the situation now is, if you were just in a completely one-on-one fight and somebody had a vengeance, then you would kind of switch your base crew to something else, and people may think of more things over time. We'll see how it evolves. New officers are going to enter the game with the, Kai Wynn is currently like a below deck one, but the other ones could add to the game, whatever. This will evolve. But we know that basically the Freeman Honor Guard Worf thing is completely dead. The issue with that is, it's a team game. It's a game where arenas are multiple people together, incursions, things like that. There are multiple other people around. So now if you can't crew your Borg Cube consistently to have the Freeman Honor Guard Worf Specialist 7 crew, then that provides an opportunity for the other 70 epics to get back into the game. So currently the maxed out cube is doing a pretty good job, especially if it got the first shot off, if it gets the attack, of taking out all 3 of the epics. The closest one to it probably being the Crenshaw. But it was always a matter of, once again, the epics fire only one weapon in the first round. They're trying to get to the second round where they fire their really good gun and start to get into a multi-weapon firing pattern. But round 1 is very, very anemic for them to get through. And particularly if the Borg Cube attacks first, it's really hard to survive that in a lot of cases. But this now shifts, because the Vengeance exists And because the Vengeance so completely and utterly eliminates the possibility of using Freeman Honor Guard War Specialist 7, that if there is the threat of a Vengeance being present, if it is in an arena, if it's on the server in the incursion, that some people on that server have it, if there's one kind of in the area, then it's going to be hard to send your cube out with that crew on it. So you're going to have to choose when to do one versus the other, and there may end up having to be some compromise there. That if you're in a 370s versus 370s arena, do I try and put out my cube with the good Freeman crew and just avoid the Vengeance and go try and hunt Crenshaws and Antes and Scimitars? You could probably kill a Scimitar with anything you want, but the other two are legitimate. So are you going to just try and avoid the Vengeance and do that and go for the best crew anyway? Or are you going to go for kind of a compromised crew, and then that actually makes you more vulnerable to the Crenshaw? So I think that's one of the trickle-down impacts that they didn't really consider when doing this, is they were viewing it clearly in isolation. And of course, they were responding to very specific crying from from people that spent a lot of money, that they were trying to make them happy very, very quickly. And I don't think even for a second it occurred to them how this would impact other trickle down fights to it. But essentially, if it leads to the cube having to be crewed in a way that is not super vulnerable to this one ship, then it's going to make it more vulnerable to other ships that it was not currently vulnerable to. So instead of just nerfing that one relationship, it ends up massively nerfing the cube as a go-to thing to use in the first place. So really, really lowers its ranking in this. And then particularly since the Crenshaw crewing does not have to change, since you're going to be using the Interceptor Strike Team pretty much anyway, whether you're fighting another Crenshaw, a Cube, an Enterprise E, a Scimitar, or the Vengeance, you're going to be using the same thing. They can confidently go in with pretty much the same crew, but the Cube is the one that's going to have to be situationally adapting. So when you go send something into an arena, when you go send something into a PvP location in an incursion or whatever, territory, whatever, if people still fight over that, that sort of thing, you're going to have to decide, how do I want to crew it? And is it possible that other things are present that are going to counter it? And at this point, the Vengeance no longer has to worry about being countered, and the Crenshaw no longer has to worry about being countered, but the Cube does. So the Cube is kind of going to have its head on a swivel and be changing what it's doing throughout. So, this is obviously a very specific scenario, but this is the sort of thing to look for in the game when you do see a new officer introduced, or a new crew member, or a change to a ship, or a new thing come in. You have to consider not just, well, I don't have that particular ship, so I don't care, to how will this trickle down affect other things. And very often that will be the case, that if something changes, it's not necessarily going to change what you do, but it changes what your opponent can do. They're now constrained in some way simply by the existence of this other thing, and now they have to change their setup in a way that it may be something that you can take advantage of. So that's something to consider here, and just kind of consider in general throughout the game. Overall, I think, obviously pretty apparent, this is a terrible direction to go. The game for years was always one where there wasn't a single dominant thing. There wasn't like, this is the best ship, this is the best crew. It was always the case that there was a bit of a, there used to be the battle triangle. That doesn't really exist anymore. But there were always ways to counter things that, well, if you go crit, I can go anti-crit. If you go shield bypass, I can try and kill you quicker before you get that done. Like, I can switch ships, I can switch crews, I can rearrange my below deck to overcome the thing you're doing. If you're being very offensive, I can change to a very defensive below deck. The ability to do that has become less and less and less, and the shift has been much more towards a complete pay to win. It was always, before, the game's nature, you could always pay for an advantage, but I don't think there was ever unsurmountable advantages in it. We've now hit that point. There are insurmountable advantages that cost tens of thousands of dollars that no one can really compete with if you don't have that. And we've even now seen this willingness of, if you spend that money and people figured out how to compete with it, we will simply retroactively punish them for trying to overcome the people that spent that much money. We're not gonna, they did actually try and teach the money people how to crew, but then the news release they came out with used the incorrect crew. They put a bunch of things on the below deck that weren't even PvP officers, whatever. So Scopely doesn't know how it works. A lot of the top players don't know how it works. Definitely some do. But that's the case. They're clearly gone to a thing that if you pay this much money, you simply win. So that's something that you're either going to have to accept in the game, that some people can just buy the win, or move on from it, as I'm kind of leaning towards. So that's where we are. The ability to counterpunch, very, very severely nerfed in this. I think, though, there is still some opportunity to try out some of these things and still push for what will get either a big amount of damage done or still find ways to go for that one round sort of kill. We'll have to see in the coming months. There's some implication that there's potentially more defense coming to the game that is going to elongate the length of fights, but no idea what that's going to be. But that kind of keeps being hinted at. But everything they've been doing lately has been to increase damage, increase damage, increase damage. Kai win a tiny bit is going to dial it down, but then the prototype Forbidden Text they just released massively dial it up. So so they're not really committing to that reduction damage. We're still very much in one round fights, things like that. So keeping an eye on it, but to be honest, I don't know how long I'm going to keep an eye on it anymore, because I think they just this one's jumped the shark for me. That it's clear that even if they design it in such a way that the spenders, the massive spenders lose, they're just going to fix the game so they win. And I don't love that. That's not usually something you want in your game. So take care.